We were out there, and Maywell said, "Oh, here's the cheewhat giant, and you're in front of it." And we took oodles of photos there. And then he said, "But listen, you guys, there is a tree that is even bigger, but you have to find it." And that was it. And that's the last thing I heard about this, and I'm amazed it still hasn't been found. Well, Maywell had a bent on teasing people, but he was quite serious about that one. Yeah, you know, that you could tell the difference. Yeah. He would plant certain things somewhere around the corner along a remote trail and let people discover them. He had a tremendous sense of humor.
So I just went through his whole archive that he donated, and I looked at this picture of a tree, and it said mystery tree 26 feet across. I'm like, oh, that's the tree.
He became more and more reticent, teasing almost, letting me know that, as I said, he shared my view that the biggest trees in British Columbia are still out there to be found. And that's about it. He also gave me a whole bunch of photos.
Andy received photos of 5 different trees, but 2 of them were of the cheewhat giant, and here they are, back to back. Maywell's cut and pasted enough pictures together to make it look like the cheewhat giant was cut down. These are the first clues of the man we're dealing with.
But some people even think this shadow behind this person, it's not a shadow, but it's a piece of the tree. They even think that might be another tree. So the picture might look like the tree is bigger than it really is, which is interesting because sometimes people have doubts about whether or not there's another tree.
You can make a picture do a lot. So to some degree, like, it's exciting, but I think what most intrigues me about it is I've looked at a lot of what loggers say about big trees and what, say, even like Darius Kinsey would have been saying in the early 20th century. And usually about 6 meters or 20 feet across is the common stopping point for almost every big red cedar I've ever seen described by a logger or seen in an image, right back to sort of the early 20th century, late 19th century. And so it is amazing that this tree isn't just largest by inches. It appears to be significantly larger than anything that anyone's ever talked about that I've heard about. I think anyone, if they wanted to, and spend a little bit of time with angles, could produce an image that approximates that. However, I think Maywell's credentials are incredibly high.
This is the type of thing Ian's talking about. You can see that there's 2 distinct falling cuts, so this is one faller cutting 2 trees at once. And yet this photo has been causing a ruckus online for years as people are continually tricked. If, as Ian says, all we're counting on is Maywell's credentials to believe that he didn't do something like this, what are Maywell's credentials?
It's been 30 years since Maywell Wickham measured 2 giant cedar trees. One he registered as the largest tree in Canada and the largest western red cedar in the world. But it was the smaller of the 2. The other he kept a secret, taking its location to his grave. Decades later, the hunt has been sparked again, and a new generation of tree hunters is racing to find Maywell's mysterious giant.
To feel like the biggest tree on Earth outside of California is just waiting for someone to find it is awe-inspiring.
That's record redwood and sequoia size. So if we have something like that here, what else is out there?
Some didn't believe that it existed at all.
I think as a myth, it serves the truth, which is what good myths do.
Big trees. It's there.
I grew up in Metchosin, a small rural town just outside of Sooke, where Maywell lived. I wasn't a Sooke local by any means, but I spent a lot of my childhood going there for skate parks, bike trails, or summer camps. So many things I thought of as iconically Sooke, I'm now realizing are iconically Maywell. Whether it's the lighthouse that beckons you in, or the benches at each bus stop, Maywell's handiwork is unmistakable. A simplicity combined with creativity and an appreciation for natural beauty, while also building things 5 to 10 times stronger than they need to be. Just when I started to realize what I thought of was Sooke was actually Maywell, Phoebe pointed to this arch and said, you know, Maywell had to make it look real Sooke, and it flipped it on its head again, blurring the line between what's Maywell and what's Sooke. Maywell's a bit of a legend within the community here, almost like a mascot of Sooke. He embodies so many of their ideals, a pioneer mentality, an appreciation for nature, and a do-it-yourself attitude. This is the Sooke Community Garden that Phoebe Dunmar had a large part in organizing. But even in his 80s, Maywell was responsible for designing and creating a lot of the infrastructure within it.
We started in 2010, and the pond and the nature garden here was all done in 2012, and the orchard was planned in 2011. Within 3 years, we almost done the whole development, all with volunteers. Isn't that something? The first plan was done by sort of a landscape architect, but it was very square, and Maywell said, no, you need a place how you can drive in. You have to be able to get in and back out again. You can't dead end in there. So he designed it, there was accesses everywhere, because he knew that people would be elderly and sometimes they would need to drive something in, and he just knew. And that's the gazebo. He said it was very important to have a gathering place. Rods are bands around big wine vats. And Maywell got them at some kind of auction, and then he and Mike just rebed them. And that's holding all this up. And then Maywell made that beautiful little bridge. Like, there's so many touches. And sometimes he wouldn't even tell us. He would, we might show up and, wow, what's Maywell and Mike doing here, right? No, they were doing something special again.
Maywell was larger than life, and so we'll start here with the amazing things he actually did accomplish. And then we'll follow the myths to a place where we're all a little less certain. Maywell was born to a Norwegian family who had recently immigrated to the outskirts of Sooke and lived their first winters in a canvas tent. They were subsistence farmers, and Maywell had an extensive regime of chores at a very young age.
They cut tires, trace their shoes in and strap them to their feet, right? That's how they had shoes back in the day, because he was born in 1925. So you adapt to what you got to do, right? Trains would come in and they'd unload the railroad ties. So that's how, carrying one as little kids, well, okay, let's go to 2, and then go to 2 on top of that, and now you're packing 4, right? Because your body can adapt.
Maywell's stories can really start flowing, and they get exciting, because there's amazing things that he did, and there's amazing things that he's said to have done. But we're going to start with exactly what we know about him. Maywell was growing up in a Sooke that was an industry town, focused on logging and fishing, with all Sooke days where they had logger sports that he competed at. That's Maywell on the far right, getting bested at log rolling. Well, on the far left, his brother seems to have caught the attention of a couple of ladies. His interest in logging didn't stop at the all Sooke days, and for a few years he'd run a small logging operation out of Pipestem Inlet near Tofino. To get a better idea of this lifestyle, I went to talk to some old-time Sooke loggers, Mike Downey and Dick Thought.
When we're laid off in the winter, I would be in the shop. This shop, actually, I've been here for 40 years. The saying was, leave camp stakey, come back shaky. There are all kinds of camp lore. Something that people don't realize is that it wasn't an occupation, it was a way of life. You know, I mean, the loggers were a different breed of people.
That's the only place I ever found bear dens was in these hollow, big old red cedars. I mean, I climbed inside the odd one myself along the hillside and had lunch. It was pouring down rain and lit a fire outside and just sat inside the tree and held my stick out there with a prong on it and toast my sandwich and, you know, get up after lunch, fall the tree, and the next day sit out in the rain, eat my lunch, you know. What's going on here?
So, I mean, there were camps all over Vancouver Island. Like, it would have been over 20 logging camps that you could, you know, drive to and then come home on the weekend or whatever, or stay in camp. With the 1980s, that's when the decline started in the forest industry. By mid-90s, there wasn't a logging camp that you could drive to that was still a logging camp. The fallers would say 540s all day long, which means he's bucking 5 40-foot logs out of a tree all day long, because there were stands of 250-foot tall Douglas fir like that, just, you know. And I've seen that. The tall usually on an eastern slope, but they were so awesome, so majestic, and so, you know, should have been sacred, but should have been treated with a bit more respect, maybe.
Mike is explaining something here that I've never understood until he explained it. But the really rich forests of Doug firs weren't the truly ancient ones. They were the ones that had had a wildfire about 300 years ago, and all the firs grew back at the same time, making them straight and tall as they grew together towards the light. These existed up and down the island on the eastern slopes, where there's a little less rainfall and more of a fire regime.
What they're called pure stands of 200-foot tall Douglas fir mixed with hemlock and cedar growing in. I mean, they just occurred in a different situation, I think, from being burnt over. I think it's gone. I don't think it exists anymore. Southern Vancouver Island, ancient forest in transition where the big firs were. Biggest Doug fir in the world.
Mike's not exaggerating. In the valley where he used to log, still stands the largest Douglas fir in the world, left by a faller who didn't want to cut it down. This tree is 12.5 feet across at the base. Mike recalls a tree they logged that was 11 feet inside the bark. He believed it could have been larger than the Red Creek fir, and it was surrounded by giants.
The one that sticks out in my mind was 11 feet inside the bark. And there were quite a few 10s. That was in the upper San Juan.
It didn't look big at all. I didn't realize how big it was until I put the saw beside it, and then I just realized this is just something that can't be done with a 36-inch bar. So at the end of it all, the fellow at contractor I was working for got a saw with a 56-inch bar, and he's the one that put the undercut in it.
Nobody but loggers have ever seen that. And a lot of loggers didn't really appreciate it. It was just where they went to work. But yeah, it was, it's gone. It's like, I miss that. To see that, it was incredible.
Mike reminiscing about a way of life and a type of forest that are now entirely gone makes me wonder if this is what Maywell was trying to preserve through his mysterious tree. to encourage another generation to get out and connect with the forest and believe that there's still mystery left in a landscape that's been so heavily altered. He wouldn't be involved in logging for long though, and eventually he trained under a shipwright in Seattle and then established Sooke Marine Industry in the Sooke Basin. This wouldn't save him from the boom and bust of the logging industry, because the fisheries would collapse at a similar time in a similar manner.
His shipyard not only was for like tugboats and boats for other commercial uses, but it was for the fishing fleet. And then in Sooke, the fishing fleet was quite large. And so he had a lot of work to do. And the fishing season was way bigger than anybody ever remembers. It opened in April. That's how much fish there was off the West Coast. So he was very busy, say from April right through to the autumn, from his shipyard, where everybody came to get their boats fixed. And that's where people came to tell the stories. And say often, like, it was even fishermen. It wasn't always just loggers. When you're out fishing the West Coast, you might at times have an opportunity to anchor in a quiet bay, and you'll go walking in the forest. Guess what? You'll see a big tree. So they would come back and tell them about the big firs or the big cedars. So it was all that marine environment and the art of telling the story and sharing what you saw in these forests. Maywell was a big part of that.
We wanted to take a page out of Maywell's book. We couldn't recreate the hustle and bustle of the shipyard in the 80s, but we could go find and talk to mariners. And so we went to Bamfield and started chatting with the locals about big trees. We ended up bumping into a guy named Pirate Paul, who showed us a picture of possibly the largest cedar I'd ever seen. We pushed him further. He believed it might actually be Maywell's tree, and agreed to take us out to see it.
So if you were to actually measure solid wood to solid wood, you're looking at 25 feet. See that beautiful property with the brown? That's the Wickham property. Oh, I see. And that's an old family. Yeah, it freaks people right out when they see an eagle following me around. He's following you, man. We bought a metal detector and went in search of history. And we were metal detecting where all those stumps are on Edward King, and we just stumbled upon it. It's pretty unique.
Wow, this is it. Wow.
Holy cow. I think it's the same tree. That's the same tree. Look at, but you still got to go over the silhouette. More. Oh yeah. Huh? It's so close. It is actually. Yeah. No, that's what I was looking at. Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. Huh? I think it's the same tree.
There are two prominent features both of these trees have in common: a triangular-shaped scar backed by a giant burl with a hemlock on them. In the end, we decided that this probably wasn't Maywell's tree, but sitting atop it with Eric, it felt good to chase down a myth that turned out to be real. This was the second great adventure and the second great tree that Maywell's mystery had led us on. I found out who the people were in Maywell's photo of the first tree. They invited me for a visit and told me some stories that gave me some more insight into what type of quest Maywell had sent us on.
We went up to this point and we all had to put, and this was just a rope around our waist, right? And walking down this cliff that you got down. So I was really worried about the kids, but no, and he was the one who was holding the rope as we went down, right? And the canoe came down and Christy was there and she was only a year and a half or something. And later when we got up, once we were up there, there is a place just before where you could easily actually lounge without rappelling down. but that kind of adventure was just amazing.
This is reminiscent of Hans describing how Maywell would leave ordinary objects deep in the bush for people to discover. And it's not the first or the last time Maywell will create a wild goose chase for his own amusement.
He had built cabins out there in the back hills. So then what he did is he went and let the forestry guys know that there's a cabin there if someone's lost. You know what I mean? Well, they come out and they bring in a helicopter and burn it down. So his humor was, he'd phone in every year and tell them that he's got a cabin up there, right? And they'd be up there spending all this money and resources looking for this cabin that Maywell told them, and he'd send them off on goose chases, right? Because that's what they did. They burned down the cabin that he built for the people, right? Like, you know what I mean? But that's his humor, right? And, you know, and there'd only be a couple that would know, and he'd just look over and just smile, you know what I mean? Like, just smile at you, and it'd be cool, right? You know.
These are the credentials I was wondering about, and Maywell seems like the exact type of guy who might have made this whole thing up so that he could look over at his buddy and give him a cheeky smile. The other side to it is maybe it's a tall tale, because there's a couple about Maywell that stretch the imagination.
Lots of rumors and old stories about him that I've heard. He found that golden bell that fell off the Spanish ship.
And some of the cool stories of him finding that, like a whole big waterfall.
Where there were lots of gold.
Behind the waterfall. And
below a water.
And the water is so deep.
So he found this hole, and then he got in there, and it's all full of water, so he packed up 1,000 feet of garden hose, right, in loads, took it down, siphoned it so you could get it down below enough that you could get in there. And he says, an egg carton rounded off with nuggets in the bottom.
Is it possible? Yeah.
But maybe not.
Behind the never-ending string of stories is a man who gave back a ton to the community, working as the fire chief, digging graves for the cemetery, volunteering with the museum, taking kids on field trips, pioneering the Juan de Fuca and Kludak Trail, as well as building many cabins along it, and building and working on projects around the community with no recognition.
Help me out, you know what I mean? Trying to help me out on little riddles and rhymes that you kind of would catch later on, even after he was passed. I'm like, that's where that came from, eh? Like, you know, he'd always give you riddles, right? You know?
This is a riddle left us by Maywell, and what's yet to be seen is whether we can figure it out.
He had a canoe is like 100 pounds. You know, guys would tell me, like, they're like, Tony, like, there's weight in it or some lead or something. Like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, but he'd be carrying it along.
Yeah, because Maywell used to tell stories like that about bad guys coming in the boats and wanting the boats fixed in a really big hurry. And then Maywell somehow figured out that there was money hidden in maybe somewhere in the planking of the hull. And the story went out that Maywell was the one that was hiding the money in the boat. So Maywell got arrested that night.
It wasn't like, oh,
He was no fool, he was no pushover.
No, absolutely no. And he was stubborn too.
Oh yeah.
Very bushwise. He really, I don't think anything in the bush intimidated Maywell at all. And he had incredible balance.
And the flies were biting us, so we would just go and flick it into the water. Everything was so calm, and this beautiful trout coming up, and it was cool.